My ex-wife and I met in high school. It was the classic football player cheerleader love story, except I was really in love with her. We stayed solid till the end of high school, and since we were stupidly in love at 18, we got married. Our whole lives were planned out during our high school days, a beautiful, small house with a great view, a kid whom we'd raise with love, and a few more simple wishes. Almost all these dreams were ticked off by us, one by one, until she started behaving differently around me. She grew distant and developed a nasty temper that terrified me. I tried to get her to talk all that while, but it was useless. I was so in love that I was blind to see that she was losing interest in me. Reality knocked out the air from my lungs when she asked for a divorce. I wasn't given an explanation or a reason for the same, so I suggested couple therapy before getting divorced, but she was stubborn. So without a choice, I had to let her go. When she left, she made sure to leave no traces behind. It wasn't until a cold December night that I last saw her. A suitcase in one hand and a bundle in her other. She was standing outside my porch, our porch. I asked her to get in, but she refused and kept the bundle on my doorstep and left without a word. I was frozen in my spot and couldn't move until I heard a cry from the bundle. A baby peeked at me and continued crying. After the initial shock, which lasted a good few minutes, I was convinced that I was the child's father. That is how I became a single parent at 19. I waited a year hoping she would return for her son Jake. She didn't, and that made me take full responsibility for my kid. Since I was still young, I struggled to balance my work and my son's life. I tried to be in his life as much as I could, just so he won't feel his mom's absence. I gave my everything to raise him to be a good person, and the bond we shared was my reward. 20 years later, everything was going well until a late October afternoon when someone rang the doorbell. Jake was home, so he went to get the door. I didn't hear who it was until Jake called me outside. I was taken aback to find my ex-wife, who shamelessly left Jake at my doorstep without a word, back on my porch. But I wasn't ready to have her wreck mine and Jake's life anymore, so I asked her to leave. But she begged to speak to both of us, and this time, she had a few words to say. She looked pretty much the same except for a few gray hairs that outlined her hairline. We let her inside and she was silent for a while before she chose to speak. My ex-wife looked at my son, back at me, and confessed that I wasn't his real dad and wanted Jake to live with her and her husband from then on. Before I could react or question her, Jake, who was silent until then, started moving toward her and shouted. He began defending me, saying I raised him and was more of a parent than her. She looked pained, but before she could speak up, she got a call. She said she had to leave and would come back to explain everything. Jake and I were silent while we watched her leave, again. But this time, she left an allegation that would make or break Jake and I's bond. I confronted Jake about his sudden anger, but he too left without a reply. When he came back, Jake and I never fully talked about how he wasn't as surprised as me when she delivered the news. After a while, he confessed that he knew about his real dad and that he was my ex-best friend from high school. To say that I was shocked would be an understatement. I tried to get him to give more details, but he just wouldn't continue that conversation. Am I the a-hole for what happened between me and my ex-wife and later letting her into our lives again without asking Jake first? True to her word, surprisingly, my ex-wife visited us again after that. Jake was silent again and moved to a corner of the room. She began talking about how our marriage ended because she started seeing someone else after tying the knot. It broke me to notice that she never mentioned his name to me even when she was confessing everything. It was difficult to listen to, but I kept a straight face. The guy that she was seeing, my ex-best friend, didn't want any kids, but she became pregnant unexpectedly. Afraid that he would leave her if he came to know the truth, she had no other option but to stay away from him for some time under the excuse of an overseas job. After she had the baby, she returned and left the baby in my care, fully knowing that I wasn't the father. She went back to him afterwards and settled in the countryside. A few years with him made her see his true, abusive side, but had no other choice but to stay with him. 20 years later, she was finally ready to be a mom and revealed everything to her husband, who was okay with the news and decided to take Jake back. I chose not to open my mouth, knowing fully well how I would shout at her for what she had done. So my son beat me to it and asked why she didn't reveal any of this to me earlier. My ex-wife seemed unapologetic when she said that I never deserved any of the explanations and that she wouldn't have disclosed all of this if it weren't for Jake. That ticked me off and I asked her to get out of my house, but she didn't budge, saying she had the right to visit her son as she was still his legal parent. I had no other option but to turn to Jake. It was his choice whether to stay with his mom or me, though I wished for the latter. Jake said he wanted time to think things over before taking a decision. As soon as she felt a hint of hope in his words, she happily left. To be fair, I had no right to ask him to stay, but biological or not, Jake was my son and I loved him like my own. His leaving would crush me, although I never voiced any of these concerns out loud to him. Should I convince him to stay with me or let him be? Thanks y'all for your support in the comments. Anyway, a few days later, my son sat me down and admitted that he wished to meet his mom and wanted to ask my permission for it. I felt grateful that he thought of me in that situation and asked him not to worry about me. She set a time and place to meet with Jake, saying she wanted privacy. When he returned after meeting his mom, he had bruises on his face and blood was oozing out of his nose. I immediately got him to a hospital, even though he repeatedly said he was fine. He was reluctant to expose the reason for his bruises, but after seeing my stern face, he complied. Apparently, my ex-wife's husband joined her to meet Jake. What started as a peaceful conversation soon ended up in her husband beating my son, saying he was the reason she was always fighting with him. He paid no mind to the fact that he was beating up his son, whom he had ignored for all these years. His mom somehow held that guy back and asked Jake to run. It was like something went off in my head. I made sure that Jake was okay after discharging before going to my ex-best friend's house. He was out there smoking when I pulled up. It must have been the pent-up frustration from all those years ago, the betrayal and today's case that made me burst out and punch him. He was surprised, and before he could start beating me, I managed to land a few more punches as payback for hurting my kid. I warned him to call the cops on him if he ever went near me or my son again. Surprisingly, he stopped after a few punches and nodded in agreement. When I drove out of there, I saw my ex-wife watching everything through the window. I can't help but feel like all this could have been avoided had I not let her in my house recently. In the following days, my ex-wife visited us and tried to convince Jake that her husband wasn't a bad guy and that it was just one of his bad days. I wanted to drag her out of there, but Jake calmly told her that he would meet them when he felt like it. The next few days were peaceful. She stopped visiting. Once Jake recovered, he explained to me how he and his friend went around looking for information about his mom a few years ago, and how someone let him know about her relationship with the other guy. He somehow figured out that he was that guy's son, but made no move to contact him. One day, he met him in a store, coincidentally. He admitted that the guy was really rude and unpredictable, and somehow this made Jake not want to reach out to him anymore. I was glad that he stayed rational and safe while dealing with all this. However, the next week, he said he wanted to visit his biological parents. I was terrified but decided to take him to them. When we all sat down to talk, Jake started talking about how they both weren't in their lives at all and how alone he felt without a mom by his side. He continued that whether or not we were related by blood, Jake considered me as his dad and that it was all he needed. Jake added that if they ever contacted him again, he would file a restraining order against them. There were tears in his mom's eyes, but she chose not to speak. I was crying happy tears when I walked out of there with Jake, happy that my son decided to stay with me. Guys, your love and encouragement were overwhelming. My son and I talked about our feelings regarding all this drama, and honestly, it felt a lot better to let it all out. Last I heard, my ex-wife and her husband separated and have not tried to contact us ever since. Not the a-hole, you had no idea what was happening with your wife. She ended it on her own without even an explanation. It must have been hard to raise a kid alone at that age too. Also, you were forced to move on from your relationship when she divorced you abruptly. It's normal to want closure for this type of stuff, and even Jake deserved answers. I have to admit that you dodged a bullet with her. I don't want to imagine how your life would have been if she stayed in your life. I'm so proud of Jake for standing up to them and defending you. It's not every day you see your children grow up knowing what is best for them and staying on that path. Much love to you both. I, female 25, have a tight-knit friend group that consists of me and 6 other friends of a similar age. We have all known each other for 7 years and are extremely close. We occasionally have little bits of bickering between us, but overall, we're great friends. One of our friends, Logan, male 28, and I used to date. It was 8 years ago, and we dated for around 10 months. The relationship was nice while it lasted, but Logan and I weren't compatible in many ways romantically and mutually decided to end the relationship. Logan now has a new girlfriend, Daisy, female 25. They started dating 5 months ago, and Logan asked if he could start including Daisy in our friend group activities. Everyone said yes, except me. The reason I don't want Daisy to join in is because Daisy's presence makes me uncomfortable. I'm not jealous that she's dating Logan, I'm uncomfortable around her because of her previous actions. Daisy went to the same school as me and tormented me throughout my teen years. She would constantly body shame me for being tall and muscular, would follow me around and tease me, and would get her friends to comment mean things on my social media. I'm more confident in myself and my body now, but at the time Daisy caused me a lot of insecurity and anxiety. I explained this to everyone including Logan. They think I'm just jealous that Daisy is dating Logan because I'm still single, and are telling me to just take the opportunity to have some closure from the bullying and that they're sure Daisy is more mature. Logan insisted that his girlfriend is so kind and caring and feels bad about her actions. I don't care if she's changed, I don't want to be around her. Last week, we all met up to go to a small event at our town center. Logan promised he wouldn't bring Daisy because she had other plans. Well, lo and behold, Daisy shows up fashionably late. She couldn't go more than 2 minutes without making a rude comment about my body after arriving. I loudly said that I couldn't do this, and walked away from them and walked towards the car park. Everyone was staring at us. I didn't care. Daisy and Logan tried to follow me. Logan pleaded for me to stay and talk. I made even more of a scene by shouting at them about how inconsiderate they are. I just didn't have the patience to keep my composure. I quickly left in my car. My friends are all saying I'm an a-hole for making a scene and embarrassing everyone. Am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. This is how I handle situations like this. Obviously, you should do whatever works for you, but I have found good success with this one. Whenever someone makes an inappropriate comment, I very loudly and firmly say, "Do not make comments on my appearance ever again." I'll just repeat that until they get the point. That way no one can say I'm being dramatic. I'm making a super clear point. It just makes them look like the a-hole. Not the a-hole. You made a scene in public because you were triggered. You told your friends exactly why you didn't want Daisy included in these group activities. You clearly voiced your concerns. How are they outraged when she did exactly what you said she did as a teen, behaved exactly like you said she would, and then you had a legitimate reaction to it? Where do they get off criticizing your reaction without taking her action in consideration? Honestly, as someone who got bullied recently in school, I understand you're conflicted. I'd suggest having an open and honest discussion with your group. If they get it, fine. If they don't, you don't really need people like that in your life anyway, because then you won't be your best self with these people. You'll be afraid to speak up for yourself, minimizing your personality for fear of being bullied. It will be like high school all over again. Me, female 29, and my husband, male 30, recently got married in Paris. It was a huge wedding with over 60 people attending. I've never been on good terms with my mother-in-law, and if it were my choice, I wouldn't have had her at the wedding, but I put our differences aside for my husband and invited her. Everything was fine after I'd sent the invitations out until I had a text from my mother-in-law asking if any children would be attending the wedding. I of course said yes, as I have a son, 6, from a previous relationship who loved my husband as if he were his dad. This was a huge problem for my mother-in-law and demanded that I hire a babysitter for my son, as he isn't even my husband's real son. My blood was boiling at this point, but I kept my cool for my husband and explained calmly that it is my wedding and I would like my son to be there. After some back and forth words, she finally agreed. After that one little argument, everything was great, and we had a few days to go to the wedding. It was stressful getting everyone to the airport and into hotels, but it all went smoothly enough. We all got to the hotels and mother-in-law insisted that she would share a room with me, my husband, and my son. Both me and my husband told her that we wanted some alone time with our son before the wedding, so mother-in-law should just share a room with my sister-in-law. She walked away angrily. After that, I thought mother-in-law would lay back on the arguing to not cause me any stress or problems for the wedding, but just a day before my wedding, she started kicking off again, saying how she should have been my maid of honor. I don't get where this came from, as she knew she wasn't the maid of honor from the start. I didn't want to argue, so I just walked away. And then finally, the day of the wedding came. The ceremony went perfectly, and it was truly the best day of my life. Until the after party where everyone just had drinks and fun without a care in the world. It was time for me and my husband's dance to my choice of song. We were halfway through dancing when I hear a loud booing from a person in the crowd, and of course, it was mother-in-law. She stood up and started shouting, "You have taken my boy away from me. He will never love you as much as he loved me. A boy's mom should be the woman he should ever love." I turned to look at her. She finished with, "You will never be good enough for my son." That's where I lost it and got up in her face shouting, "You have done nothing but ruin everything for me. You ruined the days leading up to the wedding and the day of my wedding, and I will never accept you as my mother-in-law." She started to cry and ran out of the church. The rest of the night was very awkward and everyone went home early. All of my family are calling me an a-hole. My sister-in-law and husband agree with me. So tell me, did I go too far? Not the a-hole, and I can't say it loud enough. This woman is a nightmare. It sounds like she is single and her son has been the man in her life for a while. But to ruin your wedding with this nonsense must have been embarrassing for your husband. Your family clearly have no idea how toxic mother-in-law has been, and I'm happy to hear your husband is on your side. Not the a-hole. If your mother-in-law's own son and daughter are agreeing with you and supporting you rather than their mom, then your family has no right to call you an a-hole for how you responded to the scandal your mother-in-law caused. Your family are being a-holes for caring for the feelings of your mother-in-law, who has tried to mess things up for you repeatedly rather than support you, the actual victim. Not the a-hole at all. If anything, good on you for not being a punching bag for her abuse and frankly unacceptable behavior. She needs to understand boundaries and also that you won't take her shit. It was probably better than other people saw this too. She will be embarrassed. You didn't say anything about it, but it's a shame your husband didn't get involved or try and interject, as that forced you to have to do what you did. He shouldn't have let that happen on your special day.